Tēnā koutou katoa. Today is the preaching preparation video for Psalm 31, the psalm that's set for the fifth Sunday in Easter this year. There's going to be three psalms over the next 3 weeks that we're going to look at, and these help us to think about the life of the individual, and then we'll carry on into other aspects here. But within the context of the season of Easter, this first one, Psalm 31, we want to think about particularly in the way that it identifies the hope for an individual person who's facing the challenges and difficulties of life. And I imagine that this is one that you'll be able to find some sense of commonality in your own life, and also some sense of commonality in your congregation, those to whom you're preaching. Psalm 31 is one of these psalms of individual lament. And probably the key thing I want to suggest in your preaching in this is that you identify with situations that people may face. There's a couple within the psalm. One of them is that there are enemies there. They are people who, the psalmist says, worship the wrong gods. They're people who are antagonistic towards him. So, for example, you might think about someone who's facing injustice from perhaps somebody who's outside the church, who's not part of the community of God, and is treating somebody unjustly. For example, at work, or it may well be that in some home situation or whānau setting, there's that. Alongside that, the psalmist in the middle, I don't know if you noticed this in verse 10, says that sin has drained my strength. I'm wasting away from within. Now, it doesn't actually say whether the sin is his own or somebody else's. The sense in the psalm, though, is that he's really talking here about the behavior of other people. And so it's one of those occasions where we recognize that this injustice actually has a moral character to it, that people ought not to mistreat each other, and therefore it's right to complain to God. And here's the thing. I would say in our encouragement to people, we want to do two things. First of all, we want to encourage people perhaps to adopt the words of the psalm in order that they can direct their sense of grief and unhappiness and burden towards God. Our life can be very hard and can be full of difficulty and doubt, and it is entirely possible for us to feel as if there is nothing we can do. And sometimes we need a way of giving expression to those feelings of frustration and grief and anger in a way that's appropriate. Well, one thing that is appropriate is to turn to God with that and appeal to Him. And when we do that, as one of God's people, it's right for us also to do it in asking Him to honor His own name. I wonder if you can see that there in verse 3. For the honor of your name, lead me out of this danger. There's a sense that when those outside the church attack those of us who are inside the community of God, that it actually, by the way, only when it's unjust. If you deserve to be attacked, that's not the same thing. But if it's an unjust attack on us, then it brings God's name into disrepute, and therefore it's not only for our sake, but for the honor of God's name. I wonder too if you can then try and link this up with the life of Jesus Christ. It's one thing to see these psalms as being individual laments for people, and there's the reason the psalms are so popular still is, of course, they do connect very deeply across this gulf of time and culture. But there's another aspect to it, which is that we can see in Jesus' own sufferings, we can see that he too was unjustly attacked by those who are outside of the community of God. And that leads us to the point here in Easter of resurrection hope. Have a look at verse 19. How great is the goodness you have stored up for those who fear you. Now, this isn't found in all of the Psalms of Lament, but it is found in this one and many others. And we can point people to the fact that there's a hope for the future, even though the present is not always a particularly fun place. And that hope is bound up in the person of Jesus, who embodies this psalm and these other psalms of individual lament in a particular way. So Jesus does suffer unjustly, and he has already experienced resurrection hope. We may be experiencing great difficulty now, but we too have the opportunity to experience resurrection life, a taste of it now, but the reality of it when Jesus returns. And so we want to point people towards Jesus as the one who's secured our individual hope of the resurrection in the future when he returns. And my hope and prayer is that you're able to offer this to people. Now, there's an interesting thing here, which is that I think often our hope when we encounter death has been transformed a little bit. I often hear people saying, my hope is that I'll be reunited in the spiritual world with my loved ones, which is a beautiful hope. The Christian hope goes beyond that and talks about resurrection life, that we will be returned to physical embodied life in the redeemed world, and that we will share life in human embodied material life, not just some spiritual world. And I think that's a wonderful thing to hold out to people. It may be a bit different from what they're expecting, but it's part of the Christian message of hope. And I think it's quite right to point out that Jesus, in his resurrection life, embodied resurrection life, paints the foretaste for all of us that our hope will now be bound up in that. Kia ora tātou.